To me, Jesus was very real. It was somebody who was one with me since I was a child. I talked to him throughout my day, believing that he was with me and he was guiding me through everything I did. So to discover that he was nothing more than an imaginary friend, that was beyond painful. I didn't choose to be a Christian. I was literally born into it. My father was an Assemblies of God minister. My parents divorced when I was young. So growing up, I was exposed to different sides of the Christian world. With my mother, it was a very stable, consistent evangelical Christianity. And with my father, I would travel to different churches. With him, I was exposed to many different theologies and denominations. Much like Judaism, although we have different sects and different ways of doing things, the foundation of our belief is the same. And the foundation of evangelical Christianity is the same throughout the denominations. The fundamental purpose is to evangelize. The meaning is in the name itself. So I was taught to be a missionary from a very young age, as is every evangelical. A common misconception is that missionaries are a professional. It's somebody who's paid to pass out tracts and speak on the street corners. That is not true. In fact, in many ways, the people yelling with the megaphone on Beyneynu actually do us a tremendous favor, because I have never met anybody who's converted to Christianity through a Jews for Jesus tract. These types of missionaries are often very offensive to Jews, and honestly, they do more to bring awareness to the missionary agenda than any counter-missionary organization, all of them combined. The successful missionaries are everyday churchgoers. They're your college roommates, your friend from your office. The Great Commission is the cornerstone of evangelical Christianity. It is a big deal, and it is the ultimate mitzvah that every Christian is obligated to fulfill. It's a commandment from Jesus himself. It's from the book of Matthew. It teaches to spread the gospel to the whole world and to baptize people in his name. And it's taken very seriously. I took it very seriously. My dedication to the church and my commitment to being a good Christian molded every part of my life. When the doors of the church were open, I was there. Every group or mission that was available, I was involved in. I started my own Christian student union in high school. Bringing as many people to Jesus as I possibly could was a goal that I set for myself every day. First, this was with a world focus, and I was pretty good at it. Unlike my father, who spoke to whole congregations, I happened to be very shy, but one-on-one, I was successful. I found it pretty easy to share Jesus with my peers. It was really everything I knew and was dedicated to. It was easy to invite friends to church and bring people that way. The typical method to leading somebody to Jesus was the emotional appeal, describing that nobody's perfect and we're all sinners. None of us can possibly stand before a holy God in our sinful, blemished condition. Without Jesus, we're simply not worthy. But through him, we can be clean because he bore the punishment for us. There are a lot of people in this world who simply feel alone and unloved. So you would be surprised how easily that line works with young people who are looking to find themselves and to be accepted unconditionally, to feel that despite who and what they are, somebody loved them so much that they were willing to die for them. So that resonates and really attracts people in a vulnerable state. In fact, if you listen to testimonies of people who converted to Christianity, you'll find that this is always the case. It's never an intellectual decision. They always find Christianity at the lowest point of their life, the darkest time, in the middle of some trauma, addiction, some time where they felt they hit rock bottom. It's in those vulnerable moments that somebody's able to share Jesus with them, or sometimes Jesus appears to them in some way, you'll hear. In my adult life, I had memorized a verse from childhood that really inspired me to change my focus more specifically to Jews. Although the evangelical teachings have a world focus, the Jews are definitely prioritized. And that's because they play a very specific eschatological role in end times, which means when Jews convert to Christianity, that triggers the second coming of Jesus. So you'll find that missionaries will go to extraordinary lengths and take extraordinary measures to convert Jews, specifically here in Israel, that you don't see in other parts of the world. Knowing the role that Jews play in the special, unique mission that Jews alone can fulfill made me very passionate about the Jewish people and a very sincere love and focus to the Jewish people. I took my mission very seriously, but the techniques required to convert Jews is very different than the typical methods that I had used growing up, basically because Jews tend to be more intellectual about religion, especially here in Israel when Torah is taught in public schools. The technique in reaching Jews was more involved because it required learning a whole new way of presenting and in speaking, because honestly, the name Jesus Christ and images of a cross don't invoke any warm and fuzzy feelings in any Jews. And there are training manuals on this. And if we were in person, I could pass it around for you to see. But basically, the goal is to use the language to make things more palatable for a Jew to accept. Instead of saying Jesus, you say Yeshua. Instead of saying come to church, you'd say come to a meeting of Bible believers. Don't say convert to Christianity. Say become a fulfilled or completed Jew. And always, always ensure the person that accepting Jesus as their Messiah does not in any way mean that they're abandoning their Jewish identity, because after all, Jesus was a Jew. So accepting the Jewish Messiah is actually the most Jewish thing you can do. Of course, before you can employ these new tricks, you have to actually meet a Jew. And that's really how it starts. My initial goal was simply to embed myself in the Jewish community and not share Jesus at all. That's how I could establish the relationships. I was taught to attend Jewish events, go to kosher restaurants, volunteer at the JCC, and not just any position, make sure that it was a specific position, like as a greeter or serving in some way, something that allowed me to actually actively engage with Jewish people. The goal being to become a recognized and friendly face among the Jewish community. And once those relationships were formed, naturally faith comes up in conversations along the way. The Jewish people that I approached and befriended, they never actually felt like they were proselytized because I did it in such a way that they were the one to ask. Although every discussion, to me, I was intentionally leading them to ask, but they didn't feel threatened or like I was pushing it on them because I had led them down that way. The problem that I encountered really happened when that focus turned towards religious Jews. I was attracted to Orthodox Judaism. I really wanted to be able to reach religious Jews, but they seemed to learn a lot. They knew their stuff more than unaffiliated Jews. They weren't going to follow for any emotional plea or my repackaging of Jesus with a Jewish flavor. So to reach them, I had to really learn how to argue the text and the verses in Tanakh that I believed pointed to Jesus as the Messiah. In my mind, if I could get a Jew to read the certain passages, that they would see it as clearly as I did. So I set out to memorize every prophecy that Christianity teaches is fulfilled by Jesus. And in that way, I was going to convert the religious Jews. They were tough on me. Some of them seemed to be armed with like cue cards, and they were ready with everything I would bring to them. They'd tell me things like the verses are mistranslated and you're taking things out of context, which I thought was absolutely absurd. I was convinced that they must be just regurgitating what their rabbi was teaching them. I was still determined to reach them, and I set out to counter that. I'm going to learn the verses in Hebrew. I'm going to memorize the whole chapter or the whole book so I can do this presenting Jesus to them in context like they wanted. So in my search to learn Hebrew, I actually found another way to manipulatingly get Jews to see Jesus in Tanakh the way I wanted them to, by getting them to help me read the Hebrew. In one instance in particular, I asked a religious Jew to help me understand the Hebrew of Isaiah 53. It's a common verse that's used by missionaries. Of course, I pretended to innocently be seeking truth, wanting to learn from a Jew. You'll find that in lots of areas today, especially here in Israel. Christians innocently seeking truth, wanting to learn from a Jew, looking for you to be a light unto the nations. Honestly, my agenda was really simply getting them to see Jesus in the verses that we would be learning together. So while I was getting him to read the Hebrew, eagerly awaiting for that revelation to hit him, he got upset with me. He was very frustrated. I could tell that he couldn't answer my question. I felt that I really had him. I knew that he saw Jesus in that verse, just like I did, and he just couldn't explain it, and that's why he was upset with me. That door closed. He refused to talk to me anymore. He wouldn't help me. Instead, he gave me a tape set to a counter-missionary. When I realized what it was, I thought I hit the jackpot. It was the Jewish response to Christian missionaries. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is the cue cards that they're using against me. So I set out to counter this rabbi, and I was going to learn every argument, and I was going to destroy each response that this guy could throw at me. And that was what I set out to do. And then my entire world crumbled. I went through every one of the lessons, and I couldn't counter this counter missionary, even a single argument. One by one, he completely destroyed every one of the prophecies that I knew were absolute proofs, and he was right. I couldn't make it work. I realized that the Christian Bible had purposely mistranslated verses to make them appear Christological. When verses that I knew were learned in context, they completely fell apart, and they no longer meant what I had been taught that they meant. The rug was pulled out from under me. I experienced a emotional crisis, a religious crisis. It was traumatic, and I think I went through every stage of grief. It was anger, it was betrayal, it was sadness, it was hopelessness, because in such a crisis, you lose your entire identity, because Jesus was the core of my entire being. It was everything that I said and did in my life was centered around that belief. Getting up in the morning no longer had any purpose or meaning. I had lost somebody that was like so precious to me. To me, Jesus was very real. It was somebody who was one with me since I was a child. I talked to him throughout my day, believing that he was with me and he was guiding me through everything I did. So to discover that he was nothing more than an imaginary friend, that was beyond painful. At one point, I cried out to God so deeply and in real torment and pain. I threw my pillow at the wall and I screamed at God, you don't even exist. When you find yourself in such a hopeless state and you realize that there's no God to even cry out to, that is just unbearable. It was very low. I did muster up the courage to call this rabbi directly, sort of angry, sort of sad, just in that really emotional state. And I said, you have to tell me who Jesus is. Who was he? If he's not who I thought he was, at least you have to tell me that there was some point to his existing. Did he even exist at all? I have to know. And somehow he knew that I needed more than just that answer. He told me that I was struggling to be able to file away my belief in Jesus so that it made sense in some way. But in reality, if Jesus was not the Messiah, then nothing else matters, which was very obvious, but at the same time, very powerful. Through my crying and explaining my trouble in discovering that there was no God, he stopped me and he explained that I'd simply discovered that Jesus was not the Messiah, but that God was still very much there with me, and he's in my life. But in my bubble of grief, I wasn't able to separate Jesus and God, because Christianity had taught me that they were very much the same person. It was the same. So there was a big revelation that took place. I'm pretty stubborn, so I don't know how, but somehow he got through to me. And from that point on, my life took on a whole nother direction. I set out to learn Torah from scratch, which, because I'd had such a strong foundation and an entirely different belief system, that wasn't so easy. When I began to learn Torah, I had to sort of be my own counter-missionary in my head all the time. It wasn't so easy to learn Torah without that Jesus filter. But when I did, it was so beautiful and so inspiring. When I learned the traditions and the mitzvahs, the meaning behind the mitzvahs, everything in Judaism, from the smallest mundane little things to the biggest things, they all have inspiring meanings behind them, and they're very special. I began to be obsessed with each mitzvah, and every mitzvah became an opportunity to kiss Hashem and to thank him for every blessing that he had given me in my life. I ended up converting. It was a grueling 4-year process. It was very difficult. We won't talk about that, but every convert will tell you that they went through their own personal Mitzrayim. Today, I'm like so thankful that I have children that don't know anything about Christianity, which blows my mind. They speak Hebrew. I have one in the IDF, and I have one that's a Bat Shirut, and they have a religious day school education. They learn Torah in its pure form. But I'm amazed at how deep the levels of Torah goes. Something significant that I realized about the difference in Christianity and Judaism is the deeper I delved into Christian Bible and Christian theology, I became more and more confused. It didn't make sense, and you had to really do a lot of acrobats in your mind to grasp the Christian concepts and theology. And like Torah, when I learned Torah and you unpeel every level of Torah, the deeper you go, the more it makes sense and the more clear things become. That is, in a nutshell, how I came to be a Jew.